If you wanted an open marriage, you should have at least sent me the memo. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, watching Allie's face. She froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. A flicker of something, guilt, shock, maybe both, flashed in her eyes before she forced a tight smile. Uriel, what are you talking about? I let the silence do the work. She set her cup down, fingers tapping the ceramic like a nervous tell in a poker game. Brett Simmons, I said, slow and even. No theatrics, no raised voice. Austin trip 2 weeks ago. And today, right here in town, across the damn cafe from me, like I wouldn't notice. Her mouth opened, then closed. I was having lunch with a friend, she tried, straightening up. I exhaled, shaking my head. A friend, I repeated. That what we're calling it now? Allie had always been quick with words, sharp when she wanted to be, but now she was scrambling. I let her. She knew better than to lie to my face, but she was still trying to find an escape hatch. I needed someone to talk to, she said, softer this time. Uriel, you've been gone so much. Careful, I cut in. If you're about to blame me, you might want to think that through. She pressed her lips together, looking down at her coffee like it held the answer. I never meant to hurt you, she said finally. Yeah? Guess that makes it better. I pushed back my chair and stood, tossing a few bills on the table. Finish your coffee. You'll need the energy to figure out where you're sleeping tonight. I walked out, jaw tight, already feeling the gears turning in my head. My name is Uriel Vaughn. 48 years old. I build things with my hands, leather, wood, whatever people want to buy. I travel light, never in one place too long. Used to have a life rooted in one town, a house with a yard, a wife who smiled more than she sighed. Somewhere along the way, the smiles ran out. I should have seen it coming. A man knows when something shifts in his own home, but sometimes he ignores it because fixing things takes more energy than burning them down. Maybe that's what Allie was counting on. I parked my truck outside Austin Anderson's shop, a no-frills mechanic's garage tucked between a diner and a pawn shop on the outskirts of town. Austin was out back, sleeves rolled up, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that looked dirtier than his fingers. Thought you weren't rolling through for another week, he said, squinting against the sun. Change of plans. He took one look at my face and nodded toward the shop's side door. Come on in. You need a beer or a punching bag? Both. Inside, I grabbed a bottle from his mini fridge and sat on a battered stool. Austin cracked his knuckles and leaned against the workbench. All right. Who pissed you off? Allie. His brow furrowed, but he didn't look surprised. She finally do what you always suspected? I took a pull from the bottle. Simmons. That event planner asshole. Austin let out a low whistle. Damn. Thought she had better taste? I smirked. Guess not. He crossed his arms. So what's the play? That was the question, wasn't it? Some men yell, throw things, punch walls. But anger's a blunt instrument. I wasn't going to be the fool who let emotions lead. Not rushing into anything, I said. Need to move smart. Austin nodded. Yeah. Burn the bridge, but make sure you're on the right side when it goes up. I drove back to the house, the place that was supposed to be ours but hadn't felt like home in a long time. Allie wasn't there, and that was fine. I wasn't in the mood for more half-truths. Instead, I went into the office and pulled out the financial records. Every investment, every account, every little string that tied us together. She thought she had choices. Thought she could play both sides until she decided what suited her best. She was wrong. I poured myself a drink and got to work. I spent the next 2 hours going through every account, every shared investment, every document that had both our names on it. Allie never paid much attention to the finances. She liked the benefits, not the details. That was her mistake. She'd always assumed I'd handle things. I sipped my whiskey and made a few calls. First, my lawyer in Houston, Dan Ellis, a no-nonsense guy who didn't waste words. He picked up on the second ring. Uriel, he said. Didn't expect to hear from you this soon. Everything all right? Need to move some assets around, I said, keeping my voice even. And I need it done fast. Dan didn't ask why. That's why I used him. You still keeping the business accounts separate? Yeah. Good. Then this won't be complicated. He paused. You want me to start drawing up paperwork? Not yet, I said. But keep your pen ready. I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and let out a slow breath. The foundation was set. Now I just had to make sure Allie didn't see the wrecking ball coming. I grabbed my keys and headed back to town. The sun was hanging low, stretching long shadows across the road. I pulled into Zella Bennett's driveway. She was outside, watering the half-dead plants in her front yard, wearing jeans and an old flannel. She glanced up when she saw my truck, and I caught the way her expression shifted, curiosity first, then something else. Bennett. Didn't expect to see you today, she said, shutting off the hose. Didn't expect to be here, I replied. Got a minute? She wiped her hands on her jeans. Depends. Is this about Allie? I studied her face. You already know, don't you? Zella exhaled, shaking her head. I suspected. But I wasn't gonna be the one to tell you. Who is he to her? I asked. What does she think this is? Zella crossed her arms. She thinks it's an escape. You know Allie. She gets restless. Wants the rush without the risk. She just took the risk, I said. Zella didn't argue. She motioned toward the porch. Come inside. I've got coffee. Or something stronger if you want it. We sat at her kitchen table, the room smelling like fresh brewed coffee and old wood. Zella poured herself a cup but didn't offer me one, knowing I wouldn't take it. You want details, she said, stirring her drink. Fine. Simmons started sniffing around about 6 months ago. Flirty at first. She brushed him off, but not hard enough to make him stop. I figured she liked the attention. I nodded. That tracked. Then about a month ago, she got cagey. Stopped talking about him altogether. That's when I knew. Zella took a sip, watching me over the rim of her mug. I thought you knew too. I had suspicions, I admitted. But I needed proof. She set her cup down. So what are you gonna do? I tapped my fingers against the table. Cut her off at the knees. She wants a fresh start? Fine. But she's not taking a damn thing from me when she goes. Zella gave a small, humorless laugh. Brutal. I like it. I stood, pulling my keys from my pocket. Appreciate the confirmation. Anytime, she said. Then, before I reached the door, Uriel. I turned. Don't let her make you the bad guy, Zella said. She's good at playing the victim. I gave her a half-smile. She won't get the chance. I left, climbed into my truck, and drove back to the house. Allie's car was in the driveway. Good. Time for round 2. Inside, she was in the kitchen, standing by the sink, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't look surprised to see me. That told me she'd spent the afternoon thinking up ways to spin things. Where've you been? She asked, voice careful. Taking care of business, I said. Something you should have thought about before screwing around behind my back. She flinched but recovered quick. Uriel, I held up a hand. Stop. I don't want excuses. I don't want fake regret. I want to know exactly what you thought was gonna happen here. She swallowed hard. I don't know. You do, I said. You thought I'd never find out. Or maybe you thought I'd roll over, let you have your fun while I played the good husband. That's not it. Spare me, I interrupted. Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna pack a bag and get out of my house tonight. I'll have papers drawn up soon. And you better hope Simmons has a spare room because I'm cutting you off. Her face drained of color. Uriel, please. We canoe. No, I said flatly. You made your choice. Now you live with it. For the first time, real panic flickered in her eyes. Not because she'd lost me. Because she'd lost the comfort, the security, the life she took for granted. She set her glass down too hard, the wine sloshing over the rim. You can't just throw me out like this. Watch me. I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there, mouth open, struggling for words. Let her struggle. I was done listening. I spent the next few days putting things in order. Allie was gone, but that wasn't enough. She'd spent years benefiting from my work, my money, my stability. Now she was going to learn what life felt like without a safety net. I met with Dan again, this time in person. His office was a plain, functional space in downtown Houston, no fancy decor, just walls lined with books and a desk covered in neatly stacked files. He gestured to the chair across from him as I walked in. You ready to file? He asked, skipping the pleasantries. Not yet, I said. I want everything squared away first. He nodded, opening a drawer and pulling out a folder. I ran through your accounts like you asked. Legally, you're in a good spot. Most of your assets are in your name. The house is joint, but you bought it outright before the marriage. She won't get much from it. Not good enough, I said. I want her getting nothing. Less than nothing, if possible. Dan smirked. Now you're speaking my language. He flipped through a few papers. We can expedite the process. You keep all business assets, all savings under your name. The shared accounts, you empty those before she does. Already did. He nodded in approval. Smart. As for alimony, Texas isn't a guaranteed payout state. She'd have to prove she needs it. But if she moves in with this other guy, that's a different story. Judges don't like paying out to someone already shacked up with a new provider. Then I need proof she's with him, I said. Dan leaned back in his chair. You got someone in mind for that? I did. Austin wasn't just a grease monkey. He knew people. The kind of people who knew how to dig. When I called him up and told him what I needed, he didn't even ask why. Give me a couple of days, he said. I'll get you what you need. That was enough for me. In the meantime, I stayed busy. I went back to work, put my focus on building up my inventory, planning my next road trip. It felt good to get back to it. When I worked with my hands, everything else faded into the background. The leather, the wood, the tools, none of them lied, none of them betrayed. They did exactly what you told them to. By the time Austin called me back, I was in a better headspace. He told me to meet him at a bar off the highway just outside of town. It was the kind of place with a gravel parking lot, neon beer signs in the window, and a jukebox playing country songs that hadn't been popular in 20 years. Austin was already at a booth in the back, a bottle of beer in front of him, his phone sitting screen down on the table. I slid in across from him. "What V you got?" I asked. He picked up his phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward me. She didn't waste time. The photos were clear. Allie and Simmons together at his place. Nothing left to interpretation. "That's all I need," I said. Austin nodded. "What's the next move?" I looked at the pictures again, then pocketed my phone. "Time to burn it all down." Austin smirked. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." The next morning I made a few more calls. One to Dan, sending over the photos. Another to a few of Allie's friends, the kind who'd never keep their mouths shut once they knew the truth. Word would spread fast. Let her deal with the fallout. Then I turned my focus to Simmons. Brett Simmons liked to think he was untouchable. He threw big events, had the right people in his circle, shook the right hands. He built his career on reputation, on trust. It was time to take that away. I started small, emails to a few of his business contacts, anonymous messages hinting at his habit of getting too close to married women. Then I made a call to one of his biggest clients, pretending to be a concerned husband, warning them about the kind of man they were dealing with. Simmons had an event coming up, a big one, the kind that could make or break a career. If things went right, it would be his last. I sat back, waiting for the first cracks to show. It started slow, just a shift in the air. The kind of thing a man like Brett Simmons wouldn't notice at first. His calls went unanswered a little longer. His emails didn't get the same immediate replies. People he considered reliable started giving him the polite brush-off. Then came the cancellations. One by one, clients started pulling out of his upcoming event. Too many schedule conflicts, too many last-minute budget cuts. He probably told himself it was bad luck at first, a rough patch. By the time he realized it was deliberate, it was too late. I was at Harrison's Hardware when I saw him standing outside the coffee shop across the street, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand clenched at his side. He was pacing, shoulders stiff, talking too fast, trying to salvage what was left. I leaned against my truck, sipping my coffee, watching him unravel. Zella walked up beside me, holding a bag of something I didn't care to ask about. She followed my gaze, then snorted. "That him? That's him." She tilted her head. "Damn. He's already sweating." "Not enough yet," I said, tossing my empty cup in the truck bed. "But he will be." Simmons hung up, exhaling hard, running a hand through his perfect hair. He looked around, frustrated, then pulled out his phone and dialed again. "Allie, probably." Zella shifted beside me. "She still doesn't know, does she?" "Nope." Zella smirked. "That's gonna be a hell of a wake-up call." I nodded, pushing off the truck. "Come by the house later. You'll want a front row seat." That night, I set the final piece in place. I'd hired a band for the neighborhood block party. Small town, friendly gathering, perfect setting. Everyone would be there, friends, neighbors, business connections. Allie had RSVP'd weeks ago. She still thought she had a place in this world. The band was good. Real good. And their final song of the night? A little number about a lying wife and her slippery affair. The lyrics were specific. By the time they hit the second chorus, a ripple moved through the crowd. Heads turned. People started whispering, looking at Allie, then at Simmons, who stood frozen like a man who'd just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. Allie's face went red. She whipped toward me, eyes wide, voice shaking. "You did this." I shrugged, sipping my beer. "You gave me the material." The crowd did the rest. A few gasps, some scattered laughs. Simmons turned on his heel and left, moving fast. Allie stood there, breathing hard, looking at people she once considered friends, people who were already stepping back, already deciding which side to stand on. Zella leaned in close and whispered, "That went even better than I expected." I didn't answer. Just watched Allie, waiting for the moment she realized the truth. That she wasn't just losing me. She was losing everything. It hit her when she turned back to me, desperation creeping in now. "Uriel, we need to talk." "No, Allie," I said, setting my empty bottle down on the table. "We don't." I walked away, letting her stand there, alone, in the mess she'd made. The fallout was fast and brutal. Simmons lost the event contract 2 days later. Word had spread, too much risk, too much bad press, and the kind of reputation that made high-profile clients nervous. He tried to spin it, make calls, smooth things over. It didn't work. By the end of the week, he was drowning. He must have realized his lifeline was Allie because that's when she came knocking. I was out back when I heard the car pull up. Took my time finishing what I was doing, wiping sawdust from my hands before walking around front. She was standing by her car, arms crossed, looking nervous. Uriel, she started, then stopped, probably trying to gauge whether I was in the mood to listen. I wasn't. You need something? I asked, keeping my voice even. She let out a breath. I think we should talk. I leaned against the porch railing, watching her. About what? How your boyfriend's crashing and burning? Or how you're realizing you bet on the wrong horse? She winced but didn't deny it. It's not like that. I raised an eyebrow. No? Then why are you here? She hesitated, then stepped closer. Because I made a mistake. I laughed short and sharp. You made a lot of them. Her jaw tightened. I know. And I know I hurt you. But Uriel, we had a life together. You can't just erase that overnight. I tilted my head. You sure? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn simple. She swallowed hard, glancing toward the house. I miss you. No, Allie, I said, pushing off the railing. You miss the life I gave you. You miss the comfort. The security. The version of me that would have taken you back. She shook her head, stepping forward again. That's not true. I held up a hand. You don't get to rewrite this. You cheated. You lied. You threw it all away because you thought there was something better out there. Now you've realized there isn't and you want me to clean up the mess. She opened her mouth, then closed it. You should go, I said. Whatever you were looking for, you're not gonna find it here. She stood there for a long moment, then nodded, turning back toward her car. She hesitated before getting in. I hope someday you can forgive me. I met her eyes, steady and cold. I hope someday you can figure out why that doesn't matter. She left. I watched her taillights disappear down the road, then went back inside. Later that evening, Austin stopped by. He walked in without knocking, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and dropped into the chair across from me. She come crawling back yet? I smirked. If you had money on that, you won. He took a sip. Figures. You send her packing? Damn right. Austin nodded, satisfied. Good. He leaned back, stretching. So what's next? I thought about that for a second. For the first time in a while, the answer was simple. Whatever the hell I want. The next few weeks were quiet, and that was just fine by me. No more whispered conversations behind my back, no more second-guessing, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. Allie was out of my life, and Simmons was a cautionary tale. I focused on work, long hours in the shop, shaping leather, carving wood, keeping my hands busy while my mind settled back into the rhythm I knew best. Tommy showed up one afternoon, hands shoved in his pockets, that nervous energy still hanging off him like an oversized coat. I'd taken him in as an apprentice months ago, a kid with nowhere to be and too much fight in him for his own good. He kicked at the dirt before looking up. Heard you and Allie are done. I nodded, sanding down a piece of oak. News travels. You okay? I smirked. Why wouldn't I be? He shrugged. Dunno. People always make a big deal out of that stuff. Thought maybe you'd be, like, pissed or sad or whatever. I blew the dust off the wood, set it aside. What did I tell you about wasting energy on things you can't change? Tommy rolled his eyes. Yeah. A man doesn't cry over spilled milk, he makes sure the next glass don't tip. Damn right. I picked up another piece of wood and handed him a chisel. Now quit running your mouth and start working. That night, I got a call from Zella. You coming to the charity dinner, or what? She asked. I frowned. What charity dinner? The one you already bought a ticket for. Don't play dumb, Uriel. I sighed. Didn't think I'd feel like going? Well, you're going, she said. No excuses. And wear something that doesn't look like you've been rolling around in sawdust. I muttered something about bossy women and hung up. A couple of nights later, I found myself walking into a packed event hall, dressed in the one decent suit I owned. The place was full of the usual types: business owners, community leaders, people who liked shaking hands and talking about good causes while sipping overpriced drinks. Zella spotted me first, smirking as she walked over. Damn. You clean up nice. Don't get used to it, I said. She grabbed a glass of something off a passing tray and handed it to me. All right, come on. You've got people to meet. I didn't argue. It was easier to just go along with whatever plan she had. She introduced me to a few people, none of whom I remembered 5 minutes later. Then she led me to a table near the back, where a woman sat alone, sipping from a whiskey glass. Uriel, this is Paige Evans, Zella said. Paige, this is Uriel Vaughn. Paige glanced up, cool blue eyes meeting mine. She looked like someone who'd seen enough of life to know better than to waste time on nonsense. I like that. Heard about you, she said, tilting her glass slightly. I raised an eyebrow. That's so. She smirked. Small town. Word gets around. Zella grinned, clearly enjoying herself. Paige runs that homestead up in Montana. Supplies half the farm-to-table restaurants around here. I looked at her. That why you're here? Business? Something like that, Paige said, swirling the whiskey in her glass. And you? Seems like charity events aren't really your thing. Normally, they're not, I admitted. But Zella can be persistent. Paige laughed, low and warm. Yeah, she does that. Zella rolled her eyes. You two old-timers have fun. I'm gonna go find another drink. She walked off, leaving us at the table. Paige leaned forward slightly. So, tell me, Uriel Vaughn, now that you've burned the past down, what's next? I thought about that for a second. About the road ahead, the places I hadn't seen yet, the work I still had to do. Whatever the hell I want, I said. I packed up the truck at sunrise, loading in the last of my gear while the air was still cool and quiet. Tommy was already waiting by the passenger side, arms crossed, watching me with the kind of energy that only comes from knowing your whole life is about to change. You sure about this? He asked. I shut the tailgate and looked at him. You got a problem with the plan? He shook his head. Nope. Just didn't think you'd actually let me tag along. I smirked. Well, don't make me regret it. He grinned and climbed in. Before I got in myself, I pulled a folded envelope from my pocket, looked at it for a second, then tossed it onto the porch. Addressed to Allie. No return name. Just a few final words. No second chances. No do-overs. You bet wrong. Enjoy your new life. I didn't wait around to see if she found it. Didn't care. Simmons? He was done. His career tanked, his credibility shot. Last I heard, he was trying to claw his way back, but his name was poison now. No one trusted a man who couldn't keep his hands off someone else's wife. The big contracts dried up. He'd be lucky if he ended up planning birthday parties for rich housewives. Allie? She didn't land on her feet like she thought she would. After Simmons fell apart, she had nowhere to go. She tried coming back to old friends, but they weren't interested in taking sides anymore. The invitation stopped, the social safety net vanished. Eventually, she left town. I didn't ask where. Didn't need to know. Zella? She stayed exactly where she was, running her bar, keeping tabs on everything and everyone, just like always. She'd text me updates here and there, usually just one-liners. She's gone. He's broke. You should see how quiet it is now. I'd read them, chuckle, then get back to whatever I was doing. Austin? He never changed, which was exactly the way I liked it. A man like that was built for the long haul, reliable as hell. We split a few beers before I hit the road, and he slapped me on the shoulder before I left. Wherever you end up, he said, don't get soft. Not a chance, I told him. And Paige? I didn't make promises. Never saw the point. But when I left, she told me I knew where to find her, and I told her maybe I'd come looking one day. And that was enough. The truck rumbled to life, tires crunching over gravel as I pulled onto the road. Tommy rolled down the window, let his arm hang out in the wind, grinning like a kid who just got let out of school for the summer. Where we headed first? He asked. I checked the fuel gauge, shifted gears, and smirked. Wherever the hell we want. And with that we drove. No baggage, no ghosts, no looking back.